Welcome to my scientifically informed insider look at mental health topics. If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, how can one appear less needy or dependent? So this is an interesting question. Not long ago, I answered the question, how to appear less narcissistic. And before I get into the question of how to appear less needy today, I wanted to go over some of the other questions I've received just really quickly because I found them kind of funny. For the last maybe 9 months or a year, I received questions here and there that are kind of phrased this way, like, how can I appear less this or that? And I wanted to kind of talk about some of the more interesting ones that I've received, right? So I had the question, how can I appear less jealous? Okay, that one seemed reasonable, and I'll kind of cover that a little bit in this video. But then I've also received ones like, how can I appear less intoxicated? Alright, I don't know if I can really answer that one. Or how to appear less psychopathic? I'm not sure it's a good idea to answer that one. I guess it depends on the level of psychopathy. But then we get into some more, even, I think, more interesting ones here around the how can I appear less this or that. Like, how can I appear less delusional? I kind of think if you're asking that, that's already one of the ways to appear less delusional. If you're asking yourself the question, how can I appear less delusional? Then I saw, how can I appear less creepy? So with this one, I was just thinking, I think we have to set the bar a little higher, right? Like, so if your mission is to appear less creepy, that might be the problem already, right? Like you're just not setting the right goal. So how about something like not appearing creepy at all? That would probably be a little better. And a similar one I saw, how to appear less boring. Again, sometimes we just have to set the bar just a little higher. Maybe something like, how could I appear interesting? So, interesting questions. I'm not sure all those questions are asked in seriousness, of course, especially the delusional, creepy, and boring ones. I think they were meant to be kind of humorous, and that's how I took them. If you have any other kind of how do I appear less this or that questions, though, or if one of those ones I mentioned is one you do want me to answer, let me know in the comments and I'll see what I can do there. Alright, so back to appearing less needy, right? So this one is how to appear less needy or less dependent. And it's important to remember that sometimes appearing less needy and being less needy are really the same thing, right? Because if you appear less needy, you may start to actually be less needy internally, to have fewer unmet needs or less expression of those unmet needs. It's also important to remember that there may be consequences to appearing or to being less needy. So this isn't advice. I'm not saying somebody should appear less needy. These are just ways that somebody could appear less needy. So let's take a look at the characteristics of needy or of being dependent. And mostly here I'm talking about romantic relationships, and I'm talking about appearing needy in kind of the early stages of these relationships. So we see a lot of characteristics associated with the word needy or with the concept dependent, like being submissive, clingy, passive, somebody who always wants to tag along, enduring abuse. This is a really unfortunate consequence of being dependent. Feeling unhappy, helpless. If somebody tends to belittle themselves or their abilities, that's a sign of being needy or associated with being needy. We see that pessimism is associated with it. People that think that they're not smart enough, or they're unworthy, or they're unlovable. All these are characteristics of somebody who is dependent, who considers themselves to be dependent on another person or on other people. So we can see there's a lot of really negative characteristics here. Characteristics that might be better to be treated by a mental health professional. And this really brings me to the idea of psychopathology, which I'll touch on, and then I'll go into these ways to appear less needy. I want to mention this, though, because sometimes when people appear to be needy, it's really something more to do with a mental disorder. And there are specific disorders that are tied to being needy or dependent. So if there's a mental disorder at work, then like tips of how to appear less needy won't really be successful. Again, these tips might not be successful anyway. But if there's a mental disorder, I would really suggest going to see a mental health professional. That would really be the best course of action. And really just in general, I think it's a good idea to see a mental health professional or mental health counselor. It just makes sense, particularly if you're worried about something with symptoms of mental disorder or with relationships like tending to appear needy. So I'll go over the mental disorders that are related here to neediness or being dependent. The first one, of course, and this may seem a little bit obvious, is a cluster C personality disorder in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual named dependent personality disorder. This, of course, has the strongest relationship with dependency, as indicated by the name. And we see a number of symptoms here, but remember, with all of these disorders I'm going to mention, they can only be diagnosed by a licensed and qualified mental health professional. So we see in terms of symptoms, we see difficulty with everyday decisions, a need for others to assume responsibility, trouble expressing disagreement with somebody else, difficulty initiating projects or doing things on your own, so low confidence, going through excessive lengths to obtain support, feeling uncomfortable or helpless when alone, moving to another person for support when you've lost someone who was supporting you, like if they leave, you move to somebody else pretty quickly, and being preoccupied with fears of taking care of oneself. So all those are symptoms of dependent personality disorder. Now we see other disorders that have a relationship to being needy as well. And the next one that kind of comes to mind would be borderline personality disorder, which is a cluster B personality disorder. And specifically here, there are a few symptoms related to neediness, like frantic efforts to avoid abandonment, identity disturbance, which is really having poor sense of self. And we also see a chronic feeling of emptiness that could be related to feeling needy. Neediness could also be associated with anxiety, depression, and a number of other mental disorders, as well as a set of personality characteristics that we call vulnerable narcissism. So vulnerable narcissism is kind of similar to borderline personality disorder, but they're not the same thing. We see symptoms like somebody who has a lot of shame, or somebody who's hypersensitive to criticism. So sometimes vulnerable narcissism, again, is kind of associated with being needy, but not always. So the next thing to ask, if we move out of the realm of psychopathology, right? So if it's not something related to a mental disorder, is where is the neediness coming from? And this is really an interesting question, because if somebody's in a relationship with somebody who's narcissistic, that really makes it kind of potentially confusing to figure out if it's truly neediness or if somebody narcissistic is seeking power and control, and that's creating the neediness. So there are a few possibilities when somebody is feeling needy. It may be the partner that's causing it. It may be the person who's feeling needy causing it. Or it could be a combination of both people. So again, this really just emphasizes the importance of talking to a mental health professional to kind of untangle where the neediness is coming from. So now moving on to the list of ways to appear less needy. Important to emphasize here that these are not necessarily good ideas. They're just ways somebody could appear less needy. So the first one here would be being aware that neediness is not a successful strategy. So this is really kind of a call to be a strategic thinker, right? You're trying to achieve a goal, and appearing needy is not going to really help you to achieve that goal in most instances. So kind of look at it strategically and figure out another way to achieve that goal. So this kind of ties in with the next item, which is somebody is needy for a reason. Figure out what may be missing from your life. So if we look at neediness as having unmet needs, if it's the expression of unmet needs, then it's really just a matter of figuring out what's missing. What are the needs? And again, kind of moving back to that first item, how could I achieve those needs in some other way other than appearing needy or feeling needy? Now the next way is to accept that you may be alone. Now this may seem like a little bit of an unusual item, but real power in a relationship, right, in terms of staying away from being dependent, comes from accepting that you may be alone and being comfortable with the idea of being alone. Unfortunately, sometimes, especially early in a relationship, somebody has to be willing just to walk away. That doesn't mean that it's always a good idea to walk away, but it's willing to, being capable of walking away. And in order to have that as an option in a relationship, you have to accept, again, being alone. You have to accept what it means to walk away from a relationship. The next item is to find other people to give you support or people you can talk to. Now, what's important here with this one is this may actually make you appear more needy to some people, but less needy to the one person, to the romantic partner. So this is just a good example of how these aren't necessarily good ideas, right? But this would technically, potentially make somebody appear less needy to that one person. Next tip here is to balance communication. And we see this a lot in terms of being dependent. We'll see a communication imbalance. So if you're sending like 150, 200 text messages a day and you're receiving 10, that may not really be the balance you're looking for, right? By definition, that would be imbalanced, and that could be problematic. So you don't always necessarily need communication to be perfectly balanced, but you do, I think, in most instances, benefit in some way, in terms of appearing needy anyway, and keeping it closer to the level where they're equal on both sides, right? And this is something that can be negotiated, which brings me to my next point, which is have honest communication about being needy, right? Look for reassurance, but not constantly. Have key, important discussions where you can talk about your feelings, and then really essentially at some level you have to trust. And of course, lack of trust may be one of the problems that's leading to the appearance of neediness. So this can get a little complex. The next idea here is being independent. So look at what you can't do. Look at what another person does for you that you depend on, and find a way to do it. Again, even if that involves other people, you're kind of spreading out the dependent behavior a little bit, but try to find a way to do what you can't do. Look at those things that are really just a struggle and see if there's a way to appear more independent in those situations, to develop some self-confidence and achieve some specific goals. Again, especially the things that other people are doing for you. My next idea here, or tip, is to accomplish something of value to you, right? This helps build self-confidence and self-esteem, like continuing your education, getting physically fit, learning to play an instrument like the piano, learning another language, just doing something that can help build confidence, and really also this is less time kind of leaning on somebody else. So in a sense it's a distraction, I suppose, but it's positively oriented. You'll come out of the experience having accomplished something that will give you really more to latch on to in terms of self-esteem. That's really the goal of this particular item. Now the last thing I'll talk about here is understanding the relationship between approach and avoidance. Right? So early in a relationship, both people are on approach, that passion phase. So you see two people and they kind of are falling in love and they want to spend a lot of time with one another. So they're both in approach mode. If somebody suggests a time when they can get together, the other person is right there. As the relationship progresses, approach and avoidance kind of enter into a little bit of a balance, right? So as one person approaches, sometimes what happens here is the other person starts to avoid. Now normally this moves in fairly restricted limits, right? So it's not like, you go over to visit your romantic partner and they see you come in the door and they flee the country, right? That's not the level we're talking about here. But we're talking about just pulling back a little bit. We see movements, a little bit too much approach, a little bit too much avoidance. And when these get really out of alignment, that's when we kind of see the situation, say somebody's being dependent or needy. So what I'm saying here is to understand this relationship, not necessarily to avoid, right? This is the advice you see sometimes where people will say, well, just be more avoidant, seem uninterested in your partner, just move away no matter what they're doing, whether they're avoiding or approaching. I don't think that's necessarily a good way to appear less needy. What I would say instead is limit the amount that you will approach. And similarly, limit the amount that you will avoid. So operate really in a more restricted range of approach and avoidance. If somebody's avoiding you, don't go chasing them. Don't go overboard on the approach. Approach, that's okay, that's understandable, but limit that approach. And this comes down to really establishing and maintaining healthy boundaries. That's what approach and avoidance management is really about. So these are just some thoughts I have on how to appear less needy. Again, I think talking to a mental health professional is really just a great idea no matter what is causing the neediness. I know whenever I talk about topics like being needy or dependent, there are going to be a lot of different opinions if you agree or disagree with me. on one of the points I made here, please put those thoughts in the comments. As always, I hope you found this description on how to appear less needy to be interesting. Thanks for watching.